Josh Burt, and I work for American Conservation Experience. I'm the Eastern Operations and Trail Specialist. And I've spent about 20 years working with cooperator groups, putting crews out in the field in the wilderness. And I want to share with you a little bit of what I have discovered over the last 20 years, not only using these tools out in the field, but also managing tool caches full of traditional tools, and particularly working with brand new folks who are just discovering wilderness skills for the first time in their lives. So before I move on, I would be remiss if I didn't introduce to you some of the wonderful resources that are also available from the Missoula Technology and Development Center and the U.S. Forest Service surrounding axes. The first one that I want to introduce is an axe to grind. That's both a video and a book that features Bernie Weisberger. And it's a great overview of some history of axes, the different types of an axe, and the companion video goes in depth into how you rehandle an axe using hand tools only. Also, we have One Moving Part, the recently published axe manual by Bob Beckley, and that's 240 pages, all about axes. It covers, again, the history, the mechanics of usage, and does a really good job sort of updating the rehandling and fettling process with an axe using modern shop equipment that you probably have access to at either your agency and your organization. And then finally, there's also Hand Tools for Trail Work, which features Ian Barlow and Dolly Chapman. And that kind of puts the axe in the context of a general tool cache, where you also have access to Pulaski's and Double Jacks and McLeods and all that other fun stuff. And finally, I also want to point you in the direction of last year's presentation of axes by Aaron Klug and Jeremy Watkins, where they do a really good job describing how they went through their thought process on the modern axe that they purchased for their crews today, and how you can customize that axe to your personal usage. Now, for my presentation today, what I wanted to do was a little bit of an experiment. I wanted to see what sort of axes were available to me now as a cache manager. And I was looking at the availability, how easy it is to get my hands on these things, the cost, because as a cache manager in a cooperator group, I have a limited budget to work with, and also the readiness to use. So how much energy am I going to have to put into this axe after I purchase it, or is it ready to swing out of the box? And then finally, think about what sort of a practitioner would I want to put this axe in the hands of? Would it be my 18 to 25-year-old who's doing conservation work for the first time in their lives and has never swung an axe before, or any tool for that matter? Would it be a seasoned wilderness crew that already knows what they're doing and already has a lot of swings under their belt? Or would it be a high school crew that's going to be in my backcountry for a month at a time working on wilderness trails? So let's take a look at what I was able to find. So the first tools I want to look at are vintage axes. You're not able to buy these off the internet readily unless you go to something like eBay. And I had to go to Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. It's a relatively large metropolitan area. And there were axe heads for sale. I was able to go on Facebook just this morning and find old axes for sale that I could then purchase and rehang. And they're not incredibly expensive, you know, maybe 40 bucks a head or something like that to bring home a vintage axe. And then what you can do with that vintage axe is you can customize it and work with it to whatever specifications you want, and you can really make that axe your own. So I rehandled this one. I put about 3 hours into it, stuck a new handle on it, finished the handle, reprofiled the edge just a little bit, and then sharpened it up. And now, if I was going to go take this axe out in the field and swing it, it would be a pleasure to use. It would perform well. It would work well for my body. And it would create that kind of experience that traditional tool practitioners are really looking for, where you're feeling a direct connection to the history of this object and the history of wilderness work in this country. And it would just be a real pleasure to use. But some cache managers don't have 3 hours a pop. So I'm putting about 12 crews out in the field this summer, And if I want to get a vintage axe for every one of them and customize that axe to the individual users, that ends up being a lot of time and time that you might not have. So looking at a couple of off-the-shelf options wouldn't be a bad idea. These are two of what I would call premium axes. One of them is from Holtz Brooks. The other one is Gransfors Brooks. Both are out of Sweden. This is Gransfors American Felling Axe, and this is the Holtz Brooks Arvika 5-star axe. And both of these are made with excellent steel. The handles were both a little chunky and will require a little bit of thinning down before they're really, really good users. And also, the head, particularly on the Gransfors Brook, was a little bit thick behind the edge, and you will spend some time reprofiling them. So I would say maybe 2 hours a piece tops to get these things in working condition. But they were also pricey. So the Gransfors Brooks in most outlets I looked at, forestry suppliers, Amazon, even places like REI have these now. We were looking at about $250. And Holtz Brooks axes, most places were showing them for about $220 retail. Though if you ask around, there might be an easier way or a cheaper way to get a hold of these for as low as $100 for just the head alone. But with that kind of investment of both time and money to come up with these things, I would personally probably think twice about putting one of these axes in the hands of someone that's never swung one before, because there's a possibility that they're going to be aiming for a rock instead of the wood that they are supposed to be swinging at, and there's a chance of overstrikes and things like that that might damage the handle. So maybe, just maybe, you'll decide that these are a really good option for a seasoned crew that knows what they're doing. And if you don't have the time for those seasoned crew members to go find their own vintage axe and hang those, these could be good options for you. Another option that I saw in a lot of places were these axes that were made by known manufacturers and rebranded. In this case, this is a Steel brand, and this is a Husqvarna. And this was made by the Oschenkopf Corporation in Germany that also makes racing axes and other patterns. And this was made by Holtz Brooks. And so it's good quality steel. They're good quality products. But there's a reason why they got the name of a chainsaw manufacturer on them. They're not really thinking about chopping as the primary use with either of these axes. In fact, this isn't an axe at all. This is a splitting maul. And we tend to really like this when we got to put a lot of mustard behind wedges. Things like you're hitting hard heads or you're dropping big diameter stuff and you really want to give it some push. And then this one, it could also really put some hurt on some wedges. And it's also got some funny things going on. It's got this steel overstrike protector collar on it right here and a metal plate above the eye of the axe, which they claim helps with the hang. It's attached by a steel roll pin and just a standard wood screw. It's a Spax, it's a nice wood screw, but it's just a wood screw down into the end grain. And it'll make rehandling this thing really, really difficult. And I'm not sure how much a wood screw driven down in the end grain really helps with the hanging job. So for wilderness work, I don't know if I recommend these two options. They're relatively inexpensive at $100 a pop. But there's other places you might look. Next, we'll come to what I would like to call mass-produced American axes. This is one from Council that's made right here in North Carolina, where I'm at. This is a Snow and Neely made in Maine again. And these axes both have some stuff going for them. The handles were surprisingly comfortable right out of the box. They don't cost as much money as some of the other options. In fact, this axe was about $55. This one was a little bit more at $75. And you know, they're not that bad. I sharpened up this Council to get it ready. The steel was pretty darn soft. So I think you'll find yourself having to put a new edge on this thing pretty frequently. But, you know, for $55, maybe it's a good user to put in the hands of either a really green crew, or if you're equipping a Conservation Corps crew out of your own cash, and don't want to send your Arvika 5-stars out with them, you're equipping SCA high school crew that's going to be working in your forest for the next month or something like that, maybe this council will be a decent option. I think it'll chop well if you're willing to invest the time it takes to do it. This offering from Snow and Neely, again, really, really soft steel, and it's actually a pretty light axe. I thought I was going with a heavier one when I bought it, but this is more of a boy's axe pattern. And so for chopping your way through serious stuff, I don't know if this would be my first choice. And finally, and I can probably hear the collective groan from all of our seasoned practitioners out here, these are what I would usually refer to as hardware store specials. I picked these axes up at the Home Depot this morning. They retailed for 40 bucks. 35 bucks and 35 bucks. I'm sure you can find them where you're at. And they're probably a little bit more like what the author Christopher Schwarz would describe as axe-shaped objects. I was thinking that I would get these things and say, you know, if you have an axe that's just going to be in the backcountry all season long and it's going to get abused and it's kind of going to be like your Curtis Crosscut in your cache, where if you put the effort into it, it'll cut, it'll do the job, it'll never hold an edge as well as a vintage axe or things like that. But man, oh man, these things are pretty rough. This one comes with a hickory handle, which is nice. It's more comfortable and absorbs more of the shock from the swing. But this casting is just, it's pretty rough, and I don't even know if I could go at this thing with an angle grinder and get it to a profile that I really enjoy. Same thing with the fiberglass handle. It's going to be transmitting a lot of shock into your hands when you swing it, and just won't ever perform the way you really, really want to. This Fiskars right here, again, it's got the plastic handle. It's actually a hollow handle, and it's supposed to be pretty rugged, pretty tough. It can take some abuse. And the size isn't half bad. It's a little bit shorter on the handle, and the head won't come loose according to the manufacturer, but it's just not going to be very much fun to use out in the field, not going to be the most effective chopper for you. So of these three axes, this one has the most potential, but still it's not going to be able to perform anywhere near the way one of the Arvikas or one of the vintage axes will. So all considerations that you might make as a cache manager in the future, get these axes into people's hands. And you don't need to take an all or nothing approach. Maybe you can start crews off using the less expensive axes and move into something more expensive. But tell us what you come up with, and have a good season.
Josh, that was really wonderful. And it's wonderful to see your shop. That's just amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to transition to Dolly. Now that we've learned a little bit more about axes, we're going to listen to Dolly as she relies on her years of experience and describes and demonstrates some best practices regarding working with crosscut saws.
Welcome. I'm going to start out talking about the kit I might carry down the trail with me. I've got a bucking saw with a sheath on it, Western style handles. I can carry this down the trail at my side. Shoulder strap helps with that. I've got a single bit axe with a sheath on it. I can drive wedges with this also. For wedges, I always bring along 6. I've got a little aluminum pocket wedge, but my go-to wedges are the medium, large, and the big slippery wedge. Gets me out of a lot of trouble. I've got a bottle of lube in a flip-top squirt bottle that's easy to use and less likely to leak on me. I'm also going to have my day pack with lunch, water, first aid kit, communication, raincoat. I'm going to have a shovel, and I might have an underbuck tool. I might have a pruning saw, might have a roll of flagging tape, might have a pair of loppers. There's some other things I might bring along. When we talk about crosscut saws, we generalize and divide them into categories. We talk about bucking saws versus felling saws. or we talk about one-man saws versus two-man saws. I prefer to call the one-man saw a D-handle saw because of the D-shaped wooden handle on the big end. Back to felling and bucking saws. You know, a felling saw has to be more flexible and have a curved back to better match the human body's motion in that activity. A bucking saw needs to be heavier and stiffer, generally a straight back. But beyond those two categories, there was a huge variety of saws made, a lot of them hybrids, a lot of them felling saws that work really well for trail crews to buck out the small diameter trees that we are often clearing off of trails. So categorizing and generalizing is good for learning, but it doesn't really explain all the variety of saws that we have out there. Other characteristics of saws, aside from their general silhouette or profile, I'd say, are, well, most fascinating is the grind. A good quality crosscut saw was made with the metal at the teeth being thicker than the metal as you get farther from the teeth towards the back. I normally have a saw in my hands to point and explain this. But the idea is that a good saw would automatically cut a kerf a little bit wider than the thickness of the body of the saw, reducing friction. The grinding process to make those old saws concentric taper ground was very well thought out, and it often ground away 15% of the metal. We don't have new saws being produced to that quality. Other characteristics of different saws are the arc. The best saws were made on a true arc, which is a segment of a circle. And the radius of those circles varied from 20 to 30 feet. And some people prefer a saw with a tighter arc, a smaller radius. Some people prefer one with a longer arc. And you know, the fun thing about saws is when you start thinking about all these differences, suddenly you say, well, I know why they did that. Other differences in saws are the tooth patterns. Generally, I can break them down into tooth patterns that have raker teeth and cutter teeth versus tooth patterns that have raker cutter teeth that have to do both jobs at once. We have, well, our curriculum describes the 3 or 4 most common tooth patterns, but there were variations on each of those. And the pitch varied. The pitch is also known as the number of teeth per inch or teeth per foot on a crosscut saw. And the closer together the teeth are, the more teeth per foot, the smoother that saw is going to run. Some people prefer that over a saw with wider spaced teeth that might cut faster. We're all going to have different personal preferences on crosscut saws. Other differences, some saws are more flexible than others. Length of saw is critical. Some people want a small, short, lightweight saw to carry. Other people want a big saw where the weight's going to do the job itself. I like a saw that allows me to use my full range of motion in my body. So I'll carry around a 6-foot saw when a lot of people say, well, a 4.5 would take care of it for us. The neat thing about saws is there's so many different models and designs, and behind every design was someone who thought they were finally designing the absolute best crosscut saw. And they were right. They were designing the one they wanted. And each of you will have a favorite, and you're all correct. One big difference in saws, though, if the saw has not been tuned and sharpened correctly, or if it has been tuned and sharpened with somebody who perhaps didn't have the right tools, even the best crosscut saw is just not going to work well. On the other hand, even fairly poorly quality saws, if they are tuned and sharpened well, they will serve pretty well. Anybody can sharpen a saw. It's not rocket science, but it takes attention to detail. It takes enthusiasm. It takes practice. It takes the right tools, which varies. There are different ways to do it. There's more than one way to go about it. But when I'm teaching people to sharpen saws, I do point out that it's that last 10% of precision in the sharpening work that accounts for about 70% of the performance of a saw. We're measuring those tolerances between rakers and cutters and the tolerances of the set in thousandths of an inch. And if you're off a few thousandths, you're going to notice. So that's an introduction to the saws. There's so many accessories that go with saws, but the one I have to talk about is the handle. On any traditional tool, any hand tool, the handle is the lever that connects your body to that tool. And on crosscut saws, the handle placement, higher or lower in the two holes at the end of the saw, the style of handle, the length of the wood, those things can make a huge difference in how that saw operates in your hands. So again, I'm going back to physics and design of how that tool is meant to interact with you. Everyone's going to have a different personal preference, but there's some principles that are the same. The reason we like the Western style crosscut saw handle is it has a place for both hands. If you are sawing right-handed, the saw is to the right of your body. Your right hand is low on the handle, in line with the teeth, and that's your power hand. And your left hand is high on the handle as a guide hand that can also provide lift to give you an easy start and to catch the saw, and can also provide leverage. So when you're out there hands-on, where I wish we were today, and you're learning, remember those things, that handle is the connection, the lever between you and the saw. Your hands need to be on that handle. And that saw is designed to work with your body. But just as each of us are different and each saw is different, you're going to have your own favorite, and you're going to be exactly right that that's the best saw for you. There's such a variety of beautiful and interesting handles that were made to go with crosscut saws. But other accessories are important too. So next I'm going to go over sheaths, lube, and wedges. Let's talk about sheaths for these crosscut saws. You know, the original sheaths that would come with a saw from the factory were often a bent slat of wood with a slot in it, some kind of hardware on the end to clip it on. These aren't practical for us out in the woods. A long time go-to solution for Forest Service and others has been fire hose, half hitched on with parachute cord or something. That's always been hard to deal with gloves on. And the teeth of a sharp saw will work their way through this fire hose. It's not good for the teeth, and it's not good for your hands. Another issue is this rubber-coated fire hose can hold moisture against the saw. You see a lot of old saws that have a corrosion line right about the width of a fire hose. What a lot of us have been using the last few years is the plastic lattice edge cap that you can get from Home Depot, and ski straps that are flexible. These sheaths come on and off very easily, even with your gloves on. They don't hold moisture against the saw. So there you go. And they're easy to put back on also. Again, I'd rather have the teeth pointed away from me when I do this. But I can get the whole job done with my gloves on. Teach the crew to do the same. Now, traditionally, when timber harvesters were carrying these saws around in the woods, they'd put them on the shoulder with the teeth pointed away from them, take the handle off the back end of the saw so they could walk through the brush without catching on anything. We're carrying these down the trail. There's not a lot of brush. With this sort of sheath on, you can grip it safely like this. You can leave the handles on, and you can carry it down the trail at your side without interfering with your balance. It also keeps the saw from flapping. If you let these things flap and bend too much, they'll break. If you keep the saw straight, you won't break the sheath and you won't break the saw either. I've got to tell you how important it is to use lube when you are crosscut sawing. Putting a little oil to cut the pitch and lubricate the saw makes the work a whole lot easier, and it protects the saw, and it keeps the saw sharp a lot longer. Traditionally, the old loggers would use a whiskey bottle filled with kerosene, and there'd be a hand-forged hook lashed around the neck of the whiskey bottle and a plug in the top with little slots in it. So you could unhook this from the log and sling a little bit of kerosene on the saw blade. It's not going to be practical for trail crews to have a glass bottle out there in the field, but it's fun to enjoy the traditions. Kerosene is still an excellent lube for crosscut saws. Diesel fuel is very similar. You can carry some in a approved fuel bottle. You only need a little bit. So I decant into a flip-top plastic squirt bottle. These are very unlikely to leak, and this quantity might last me for a week of hard sawing. If you don't want to use the traditional kerosene or diesel, you can use a citrus-based product. This one I have tested by spraying it onto some polished metal and leaving it for a couple days and wiping it off, and there was no corrosion. Some citrus-based products have citric acid in them and are very bad for saws and metal. So before you choose a product, you want to make sure that you've got one that is not corrosive to metal. If I'm going to use the dissolve it, I'll also decant it into a plastic flip-top bottle. Spray bottles are not very durable, and this works very well. Another excellent option is baby oil, or mineral oil without the baby scent, I suppose. Baby oil generally comes in a bottle with a squirt top, so you don't even need a smaller bottle to decant it into. Works great in hot weather. In cooler weather, you might consider thinning it with something else. When I'm doing the last cut of the day, I'll use a little extra lube to clean and oil that saw, so when I put it aside for the evening, it's protected from humidity. You all know that this is a traditional bucking wedge, or what's left of one, I guess. I tell my crews to always have 6 wedges with them. You don't want 6 of these. When I started with the Forest Service, we bought cases of wood wedges. These are not very user-friendly. Good plastic wedges are the standard now. When you get one new, some of them have a secondary bevel up at the tip, and in a narrow crosscut saw curve, this will go in a little ways and stick and then bounce and go flying out when you hit it. What I like to do with all my new wedges is take a horseshoe rasp and take away that secondary bevel and roughen it up a little bit. That makes them work quite a bit better. We honor all the traditions that go with these crosscut saws. And it would be kind of hard to explain to these guys that now we're using felling saws for bucking logs off trails because it's easier, and we use baby oil for lube, and we're using plastic and ski straps for sheaths, plastic wedges. But we're sharing the same tradition that has been most important. We're practical. We work hard. We work together. We take pride in our tools, take pride in our work. The best way to get to be an excellent sawyer is to single buck. There's no cheating when you're single bucking. You will have to have a stance where you are balanced, where your body weight is between your 2 feet or between your foot and a knee if you're lower. And you're going to have to pull straight and push straight and develop a rhythm that works. Most of the work in crosscut sawing is changing direction. So you will do better if you can learn to push and pull smoothly, and if you can learn to use the whole length of the saw. When you're single bucking, you will most likely do those things because you will be trying to conserve energy. I'm going to show you my favorite method of underbucking. No special tools required, because anytime you're in the woods, you're going to be able to find a stick and either prop it up on something or get somebody to hold the other end and adjust the height for you. So you get your stick in place, you grab your saw, both hands on the handle where they're designed to be, and you start cutting. And it doesn't take long. So you're pulling noodles out of the wood. We love our traditional tools. We love our traditions. But the traditional underbucking tool is really kind of a beast to carry around. It weighs about 5 pounds. You drive it in, you mess with the adjustments. It has no flexibility. There are a lot of improvements on this. You can buy these from a guy who makes them. You can get in touch with me for the particulars, but it only weighs about 1 pound. It's aircraft aluminum and very flexible, very adjustable. Of course, another traditional method is to use an axe and to drive it into your log and rest the saw on the back of the handle. There's some issues with that. Another option is to have a hole drilled in your handle and have a little underbuck caster wheel that sticks in the hole in the handle. You can get in touch with me about these also. So these are more options for underbucking, but honestly, you can make do pretty well almost anywhere in the woods with a stick. Let's see if I can make this still look easy. Starting a fresh cut here. Maybe I want to underbuck the whole log, huh? So your stance, your balance, your use of the whole saw, your hand placement are all critical when you are learning to saw. Beyond that, I say the saw is going to teach the sawyer, as long as you're listening, as long as you're working with that tool and not fighting with it. If you want to fight with that saw, those saws are tough. They're made of the toughest steel and they've been around a lot longer than most of us have. And if we take care of them, they'll keep sticking around. But if we work with them and let them teach us and listen and feel and get the feedback that that saw will give your body, you will learn to be a good sawyer. You'll have fun. You'll want to take care of the saw. You'll want to take care of the crew. And maybe you'll have as much fun with all this as I have. I sure hope so. And I hope I'll see you out on the trails.
With that, we're going to go back to Josh's shop because we're going to hear from him about the use and selection of rigging gear. To me, rigging is really an interesting skill, and I love to watch it. When it comes to moving and placing heavy logs or boulders, it's the tool to have. But Josh is going to display some rigging equipment for you and discuss rigging as a traditional tool. So Josh, back to your shop.
Thanks, Carol. I like to keep a couple of these in my back pockets while I'm cross-cutting. It's the reason why I wear suspenders. Kidding. Anywho, rigging is really, really interesting as a traditional skill, I think, because if you look at many of the tools and devices being used in industry today, you'll see forms that are hundreds and even thousands of years old. Axes and crosscuts have generally been replaced by the chainsaw and the feller buncher in the commercial world. But if you go to any construction site, factory, or port anywhere in the world, you'll see braided cables, pulleys, and winches of some shape or form. The form and function of these tools have not fundamentally changed, but the construction and the materials of those tools have. With ongoing use in industry comes the economic incentive to be innovative and improve. Hence, the other nice thing about rigging equipment is that the tools and the best practices are constantly advancing. And the policies, training, and manufacturer recommendations on this stuff are readily available. I will say this several times throughout this presentation. Please do not use these tools without first knowing the policies of your agency or organization, seek out training and safety and proper usage, and understand the manufacturer recommendations and intended use of each element in your rigging system. And with that said, what I want to do is today look at some different tool sets from different industries that could all be considered rigging, and think a little bit about how is this stuff applicable and useful for us out on trails trying to move heavy stuff. Let's take a look. So the first tool set I've got right here, and it's probably one that most of you are pretty familiar with. This is a tool set that's all based around the Tractel brand grip hoist wire rope puller. These come in a lot of different flavors, man-rated or rated for lifting people and not. This is a TU-28 or TU-17 rather. It's a 2,000-pound device. They also come in 28s and 32s, which can lift 4 tons and 6 tons, or 2 tons and 4 tons respectively. And these come with a cable, generally that is mated to the device. So these are rated for 2,000 pounds. So is this cable. And this is a 4x26 nylon core cable that is actually the only flavor of cable that can fit well through a grip hoist. And so they work really, really well together. Another thing that I like about this tool set is that every piece of equipment that comes in this with these has a safety factor of 5 attached to it. So the breaking strength of this cable is not 2,000 pounds. The tested breaking strength of this cable is 5 times that, or 10,000. Similarly, a lot of the other tools that come along that you usually see in a cache with these tools are also come with a safe working load limit or a working load. And so these are rated to working load limit of 4 3/4 ton, and 5 times that, it's a lot. And so these tools can withstand a lot of abuse, and they give you that kind of area of comfort when you're moving something big and reaching the rated capacity of these tools. You know you've got 5 times that before you're really, really getting into the danger zone with these tools. So they're relatively rugged. They're very powerful pieces of equipment, and you can do a lot with them. There are downsides though. Any one of you out there that has ever volunteered to carry the box and cable to a job site, and that job site was multiple miles in the woods, probably won't volunteer to do that again very often because this stuff is heavy. It weighs a lot, and all the pieces seem to be heavy. This is a block. It's the correct size for a TU-28 cable, and this thing weighs a ton. Not literally, but it weighs a lot. There are ways of lightening your load. This is a product manufactured by the Samson Road Corporation. It's called Amsteel Blue. This is a braided cable made of Dyneema fiber with a breaking strength of 8,500 pounds. And this stuff you could coil up and put it in your pocket. This is only a 1/4 inch, so not what most crews are using these days, but it's light stuff and it's small stuff. For rope, this has got pretty good abrasion resistance and pretty good temperature resistance. But compared with the other tools in this set, and really when we start thinking about things like moving rocks around, it's really not the most rugged stuff on the planet. I've got a good friend who left a spool of this stuff in a tool cache over the winter and mice got to it. And there was a pretty significant investment down the tubes when that happened. And so most crews that I've noticed tend to reserve Amsteel Blue for something like a highline system, where the highline itself isn't seeing a whole lot of abuse from rocks and things like that, but they can still take advantage of the lightweight and the really, really high breaking strength that comes with this. Another set of tools that you might consider out in the woods is this set. This comes from the world of arboriculture. And there's a lot that I would recommend this tool set based on. Number one, the thing that I like about it a lot is that it was developed with trees and the outdoors in mind. A lot of this tool set was developed with industry and controlled fixed environments in mind. So you know how much weight that anchor can handle. You know how much that steel girder weighs. And so you can quantify a lot of this stuff. But this equipment was all developed with trees in mind, where there is a little bit of wiggle room on how much you think a spar tree or something like that can hold. A lot of this equipment comes with a rating that's based on its tested breaking strength. For instance, this is a 3-strand 1/2 inch rope, and the tested breaking strength of this is 5,600 pounds, which is significant until you use that safety factor of 5 on it, and then you've got 1,000 pounds. You can still get a lot of work done with it, but it's a little bit more limiting. This is something called a Mazdan rope puller that is made in the United States by the Mazdan Corporation. And again, it is rated to 1,500 pounds and works really, really well with this 3-strand rope by Samson. And it is rated to 1,500 pounds. Not nearly the capacity of some of these industrial tools, but a whole lot easier to pack out in the woods. And also, if you're setting up spar trees for a highline system or something like that, you'll probably have a lot of this gear on site already just to get you up there and get the blocks set. So once again, I would concentrate on this stuff that there's a lot of training that goes into using arborist tools correctly. There's also a lot of policies and procedures that your organizations or agencies have surrounding this stuff. But there's a lot of good information out there that you can look at on like treestuff.com or the Samson website. They do have an app, and you can get a lot of good information on this stuff. The last group of tools that I want to talk about come from a lot of the users in our wilderness areas. We've all discovered that user groups, whether it's climbers or hikers or equestrians or paddlers and other types of boaters, are a really, really motivated and powerful volunteer base to get things done in those recreation areas. And it's only natural that those groups would bring the tools and equipment that they use in their recreation and try to apply that stuff in a trails context. And so there have been quite a few times in the past that I've seen climbing equipment being used in a rigging operation out on trails. There's some things about that that give me pause. So number one, if you look at the manufacturer recommendations and the things that this tool set was designed for, what they were thinking is supporting body weight in a vertical environment and supporting the fall of a climber. They weren't thinking about lifting rocks up and moving them around on a job site. There are ratings on this equipment. It's all based on kilonewtons, which roughly translates into about 224 pounds per kilonewton. And so this cam right here, I believe, is rated to 12 kilonewtons, which is a lot. But how squishy is that rating really? Because is it 12 newtons depending on having a solid placement and having that placement being in solid stuff like sandstone as opposed to granite? And so there's a lot of wiggle room and gray area in this tool set that, again, give me a lot of pause when I see it out on a job site. And I can't personally recommend that you look to things like a dynamic climbing rope or cams and stoppers and things like that for setting up your rigging anchors. But consult with your organization or the agency that you work for. Look at what the manufacturers have to say about this stuff and make your own educated decisions on what you think is appropriate out in the woods. But like I said, there's a lot about rigging that's new and exciting, and it's evolving all the time, and it generally comes in bright, pretty colors. So look at what's out there, seek out training, and make good decisions and have fun this season.
All right, well, we had quite a little chat going on axe handles. So I'm going to ask Josh and Bob to go ahead and expound on some of those things that were in the chat. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, let's see. Just a lot of ideas about quality of handles. Josh, you had mentioned, you know, some of the better handles, some of the fiberglass handles. And so we have about half the folks in the class that are experienced and some new folks. Where do you think they should start out in regard to that?
Well, I can jump in. So it's possible, I think, to find a quality axe handle from just about any manufacturer. You can find one that has the right grain orientation, and you can find one that's wherever you fall on the heartwood versus sapwood debate, you can find one that you're looking for. It's just going to be a matter of how easy it'll be. And so that recommendation that Bob made about the Beaver Handle Company or buying one of the A++ handles from House, I think is going to get you a lot closer, a lot faster. But also you'll get to know which hardware stores in your area have a decent selection of stuff, and you'll get to haunting them and pick through what they have on offer. And for hickory handles anyways, I can usually do all right if I'm patient at someplace like Ace.
Sounds good. Again, I apologize for my audio quality, hoping you can hear me. Jody, you put in the chat something about the lattice sheets that Dolly was talking about and how they can become brittle over time and maybe break on you in the woods. And that if you store a saw properly, agreed, unsheath, and you keep up with the wear, that maybe the fire hose is a good alternative. So Dolly, do you want to expound on that just a little bit?
Well, certainly fire hose was used for a long time, but it does wear out. And I've seen more than a few cases of the saw teeth working their way through the fire hose to damage the saw teeth and whoever might be picking it up. The most readily available fire hose now is quite a bit thinner and less durable than the old rubber coated fire hose. So one should be careful if they want to use fire hose. As for the plastic sheaths, of course, plastic does degrade, but I've been using the same sheaths for decades and they haven't worn out and they don't break. And a lot of people have good luck with them. So Again, you want to use what works. You certainly don't want to be stuck in the field without a sheath on your saw. And I recommend finding something that's user-friendly that can be used with gloves on, as you'll be wearing your gloves.
And I'd like to add a little bit to what Dolly just said for those people looking for sheaths for their saws. At the end of the season, take the sheath off of your saw. Don't keep your saw sheathed for long time storage. Regardless of what the material is, you still don't want to get any sort of moisture or humidity getting trapped underneath there. And I'm going to go back a little bit to Josh and what he said about handles. The standard handle that we find in hardware stores or box stores or wherever is 36 inches in length. That is a long handle. Most people are probably best with maybe a 28 to 30 inch handle to fit their body size properly. The way to measure that is to put the handle on the ground. It should come up to your hip bone, or put it under your arm, and your hand should be able to just go over the top of where the axe head would be. So that sizes the handle well for your body size. Now, the longer handles do have a place if you're cutting in bigger trees, but it takes more finesse, more skill to use those longer handles. And I have many handles ranging from, 26 inches up to 44 inches. And they all have their place. They all have their need. The longer the handle, the less accurate you are. The shorter the handle, the closer you are to your target, and the easier it is to strike exactly where you want to strike. Again, going back to what Josh said, when you look at buying a handle, if you go to House Handles, I think it costs another $1 or $2 for them to hand select a handle for you. It's well worth that, because they will select one with the proper grain, not just proper grain orientation, but without any run out, without any knots, without any other types of deficiencies, which could weaken the structure of that handle. Josh also mentioned, sapwood versus heartwood. And the way you tell the difference is that the sapwood is generally white. It's a lighter color. Heartwood is a darker reddish or brownish color. The Forest Service back in the 50s did some studies on the differences between sapwood and heartwood, or a combination of sapwood and heartwood, and found absolutely no difference in strength or quality. And I think that covers a few thoughts for what my other two co-presenters just talked about.
Great, thanks, Bob. It looks like we do have a few questions coming in the chat. Kip asks, does anyone know if the Forest Service has in-house rigging training, or where one can find our standards?
I can answer the rigging questions, and good to hear from Kip and Adam. There was an earlier question about a source for lighter weight blocks. So again, what we do a lot in trails is we look to other contexts to borrow tools from to use in our rigging operations. One context that I've been looking at more recently is the sort of off-road recovery world. Of course, they aren't using Jeeps and things like that in wilderness areas, but those are operations where they're asking an awful lot of their rigging, and they generally are made to the kind of specifications that we're looking for. One in particular is this block right here, which is made by CMI, which is an American company. And it's printed on it that it's rated, the measured braking strength is 11,000 pounds. Even with a safety factor of 5, that's getting us in a territory that could be useful. But again, like I can't say it enough, don't let me make recommendations for your organization or agency on rigging stuff. Go to the manufacturer, look at read their information, go to your agency, find out what their policies are, and go seek out training. Now, to answer the training question, Bob might be able to speak about the publication that'll be coming out soon.
Sure, I can do that. One of the publications, one of the traditional skill publications that the Forest Service Technology and Development Program is currently working on is backcountry rigging techniques. So this will be a sizable book. It will, I don't know quite how big it will be, but it is a complete rigging manual, non-motorized rigging. So we're talking about pretty much what Josh has been covering here. That book has been written. I believe the draft has been finalized and is in the process of being laid out. Now, that doesn't mean the manual is going to come out anytime soon. The way the Forest Service operates is once the publication is finished, once it's been laid out, photographs, diagrams put into it, and gone through the editing process, it then goes to the Washington office, the Office of Communication, for their review. That could take a short amount of time, that could take a long time. With the Axe manual, it took about 2 years for that to get out and published. COVID was a big part of that, of course, because people were working from home and it was hard to move things through the process. But there is a rigging manual that is coming out. Perhaps when we do this course again next year, it will be done. Maybe the year after, I really can't say.
Great, thank you so much. Everybody, please join me in thanking our presenters today. Josh, Dolly, and Bob. I know I've learned a huge amount.